Coming up in this episode.
That there are lots of things in the unconscious that we find it very difficult to face, and so we use various strategies, projections, and vampires are a kind of projection, to deal with it. Films with vampires in them can be scary, and they can also be scary funny, because at the heart of the whole thing is our all-too-human aspiration that when we pop our clogs, we leave a footprint. Yes, I think the vampire myth is very glamorous. You know, undead, usually very well dressed. You don't get many vampires, dressed as ragamuffins.
Vampires are endlessly malleable, mirrors in which we see our fears, our lusts, our guilt, our hopes. Each generation creates a new reflection. That was author and persona non grata Neil Gaiman's take on why we find vampires so alluring. They seduce us, they terrify us, and possibly they reflect us. Whether it's Dracula brooding in his Transylvanian castle, or Edward Cullen sparkling in the sunlight, the idea of vampires shapeshifts with the times. But why does the vampire myth refuse to die? What do these immortal beings tell us about ourselves? And why have vampires evolved from terrifying monsters to tortured anti-heroes and even into romantic leads? In this episode, I get to sink my teeth into the psychology of vampires with psychologist and author David Cohen, whose book, The Psychology of Vampires, explores what these creatures really reveals about us. And you certainly can't accuse David of confining his writing to the stuffy corridors of psychology. He's written about the untold life of the great British cook, Mrs. Beeton, published a best-selling investigation into Princess Diana's death, and even shared his experience of being abandoned by his parents at the age of 12. And you can't even accuse David of confining his mind to writing. He has made programmes for the likes of ITV, Channel 4, including the acclaimed film The Night Diana Died for Channel 5. And his film When Holly Went Missing was nominated for a BAFTA. David, thank you very much for inviting me at the threshold of your home.
Welcome.
So, you've had a career writing a lot about psychology. Vampires, though, seems an odd departure from that. Why did you start to write it?
I was asked to do it. It's as simple as that. Routledge, who have published me for, it'll be 50 years in 2 years' time, had a series called The Psychology of Everything. And the commissioning editor, who's a smashing woman called Lucy Kennedy, said, "Why don't you do vampires?" I said, "Why me and vampires?" And she said, "Why not? You'll make it fun." And that's what I tried to do. And once, of course, you start digging into it, you realise there hasn't yet been a film called Carry On Vampire, as far as I know. But films with vampires in them can be scary, and they can also be scary funny, because at the heart of the whole thing is our all-too-human aspiration that when we pop our clogs, we leave a footprint.
Very much, yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as I can tell, there have been vampire-like creatures going back into ancient times. The Greeks had a name for them called vricolates, which...
Oh.
Yeah. They were very, very popular.
Yes.
And then Hecate had a daughter called Empsusu. And Empsusu was, took passion a bit to an extreme. She bit the jugular vein of her lover as they lay in bed.
Oh, gosh, right, okay.
Yes, and so...
Yeah.
So, he expired rather rapidly. I mean, I think Jung said, the vampires are the shadows, the dark side of the self, the dark side of the ego. Sure, but I think that they reflect the hope we all have that death is not the end, because we carry on and are able to make a nuisance of ourselves when dead.
Yes, true. And in your book, you talk a great deal about John Polydori's book, The Vampire, with a Y, which was published in 1819.
Yeah.
Why did you feel that was such an important book to focus on?
Well, one is the first book that was there, and secondly, there is a plaque commemorating John Polydori outside the edit room I use.
Oh, okay.
In
Yes.
Soho on Great Pulteney Street.
Yeah.
I mean, he was an interesting man. He was a doctor. He travelled around with Lord Byron. It's very unclear how much of the vampire, if any, Lord Byron wrote. And then, poor Polydori, there's a biography of Polydori called Poor Polydori.
Right.
Because he was 26, 27
Yes.
when he died. As far as we know, he never reappeared as a vampire. But, who knows?
Who knows? Might be out there somewhere.
Yes, exactly.
And is it right that he wrote, or at least started, The Vampire at the same time Mary Shelley started Frankenstein?
Totally. They were all in the same villa, the Villa Diodati on Lake Geneva.
Yeah.
They were having a literary salon, and they're obviously having quite a good time.
And what's John Polydori's vampire like?
Well, blood-sucking and glamorous.
Yes.
and sort of, seductive. And the book ends with what should have been the wedding of the hero's sister.
Yes.
And the last line is, and he had glutted himself on her blood, being a vampire.
So the vampire gets away with it? Not caught, not captured?
There are no prosecutions of vampires, but then, here that we know of.
Yes.
But, we're living in an age when obviously there is more violence. So the vampire has a certain attraction because that's violence made glamorous, and violence that helps us think that maybe we will survive.
Violence made glamorous. Is it glamorous, the vampire myth?
Yeah. Yes, I think the vampire myth is very glamorous. Undead, usually very well dressed. You don't get many vampires, dressed as ragamuffins.
Living in a coffin, though, doesn't sound like the best life.
He lives in a coffin some of the time.
Yes, okay.
I mean, sometimes he gets out.
Yes.
I mean, when I was doing the book, I really did become reminding myself now to talk to you of the extraordinary fascination people have with death and executions. There's a book over there called The Age of Scandal, written by T.H. White, who was a very fine writer, about the sort of early Regency period. And people who were completely fascinated with executions, and people who went to see the executions in France. I mean, if we had public hangings these days, I'm sure they would be sellouts.
Yes, that fascination with the morbidity of life, or I should say the end of life.
The end of life, yes.
Compare Polydori's vampire to the later Bram Stoker's Dracula. I mean, Dracula is still well known. I think even with young people today, Dracula is a name we know. Yeah. Why has John Polydori's vampire been forgotten?
Well, one, it's written in slightly difficult English, and not that difficult, but, and secondly, it was a short story. And short stories at that time were very, very popular in a way that I don't think they are now. It's, as far as I know, no one has made a film of Polydori's life, which is a pity. Note to commissioners watching the past.
I was going to say, there you go. We've got a volunteer right here.
He and Byron did travel around Europe a great deal, which is how they ended up on Lake Geneva. They all had a tendency to die young of something or other.
Since 1819, we've got Bram Stoker's Dracula, obviously, and then we sort of move up into other areas. We've got Anne Rice's books, the Chronicles of Vampire, the Vampire Chronicles. We move up into Buffy the Vampire Slayer, True Blood, the Twilight movies, obviously. Sesame Street has a vampire Dracula, the Count Von Count in it.
I forgot we like this.
Yeah, which is an odd one, I always find. But why do you think the vampire myth has, I guess, lasted across cultures and across centuries?
I think because it gives us hope that we don't die, and it has, violence has always a certain appeal, and violence which is stylish has more of an appeal rather than just ghoulishness.
Does it have parallels to almost true crime. One of the most popular entertainment these days is people watching or listening to true crime podcasts and shows. That has a sort of fascination with that similarity of violence.
Yeah. If you took crime off television, the screen would be largely blank.
Yes.
I mean, what is interesting is that there are some detective shows. I mean, Poirot is the most obvious one, which is very rarely ghoulish.
Yeah.
Miss Marple, equally, very rarely ghoulish.
Yes.
Agatha Christie obviously didn't have that much interest in ghoulishness, and without the ghoulishness, she still manages to be probably the best-selling author in the world.
Yes.
Even now.
Yes. It's true. It's like almost an exception, though, because you look at a lot of the crimes, there is a ghoulishness about it.
Yeah.
Even going back to Arthur Conan Doyle, there's ghoulishness in The Hound of the Baskervilles.
Yeah.
There's ghoulishness certainly in Edgar Allan Poe when he wrote the detective stories. I can see that.
And it's the room of the murders in the Rue Morgue with you. When it's an orangutan, what did it?
Spoiler alert.
Yeah. Well, if those who hear this podcast or view it have not read Edgar Allan Poe, they should.
Of course, vampires aren't just fiction fang-wielding creatures. There are folklore tales of vampiric creatures, and you mentioned some originally, and I've in my research looked up. There's the chupacabra from Spain. Latin America was a lizard-like creature who sucks the blood out of goats. There's the striga from Albania.
And Romania. They also
they have that. The witch sucks blood out of babies.
Yes.
Yeah, a bit more ghoulish, that one. And the strigoi, again, probably what is based Stoker-based Dracula on, that sort of Romanian myth. I find it striking that every culture seems to have a version of this story. What does that say, I guess, about the universality of the concept?
It's obviously popular and speaks to something in us. I don't know enough about native Indian culture to know whether they have it, or indeed Hindu culture. But no, it's pretty widespread. But then why shouldn't it be? Because death and fear of death is universal.
Yes.
We all have to face it and come to it.
Yes.
With valour or without valour. It's something we all have to face, that one day we are not going to be here. I personally mind that very much, but that's
Yes. And the way you're talking, you've mentioned obviously it's a fascination and fear of death. We're sort of moving into what Freud would call, that sort of fear of things. You mentioned Freud, you go quite a lot into the psychoanalysis of vampires in the book. Could you sort of go into that in a little bit more detail?
Well, he wrote quite a lot about the uncanny. And I think he was quite interested in those phenomena.
Yes.
And a number of his patients were obsessed with them. And Jung was really obsessed with it. Jung was sure that the vampire was really a shadow of the ego that the ego couldn't bear to face.
Yes.
And there was a kind of spectrum to analysis, that there are lots of things in the unconscious that we find it very difficult to face. And so we use various strategies, projections, and vampires are a kind of projection to deal with it. I'm not entirely persuaded that's right.
So the shadow archetype of Jung, that darker side of us, do you think that doesn't need to be faced by us? Can we ignore it?
I don't think we really can. I think some people are better at ignoring it than others. Sometimes it will hit you. I mean, I find as I get older, when I look in the mirror, I sometimes see my father staring out at me, which I don't particularly like, but I don't think it's particularly odd. Life isn't easy. I mean, in the West, when you think of what is going on in Gaza, Sudan, and who knows, with Trump, which many people say is a narcissist. Well, he obviously is a narcissist, but many politicians are. It's not. I mean, Churchill was undoubtedly a narcissist as well, but he was a good narcissist. And if he hadn't had such total belief, people like me who are Jewish probably wouldn't be here. So thank you, Churchill.
And interestingly, I don't know anything about Churchill's belief in vampires, but I can imagine it's a very dismissive of such entertaining mythology. Hitler, however...
Oh, the Nazis and vampires and the occult were completely obsessed with it. There were lots of studies of Hitler. There have been lots of studies of Hitler. And nobody can really, I think, understand why he became so obsessed with the occult. And indeed, the whole of the Nazi party did.
Yeah.
Or most of them.
Going back to Jung then, and the shadow archetype, and thinking about the stories of vampires and how they generally play out, I guess in Jungian terms, could falling in love with a vampire in fiction be seen as, I guess, integrating your shadow into yourself and becoming at ease with yourself?
Cool, that's an interesting thought. Might be.
Yeah. as a not a Jungian, I guess no, wouldn't know. But
I mean, and falling in love is a wonderful thing, but also it can be an extreme thing. And falling in love with a destructive person is an extreme thing, and lots of people do it.
And I was thinking, because over the centuries, the stories have evolved, I suppose, from the Polydori's one, where at the end, as you say, it's not a comedy, it's a tragedy at the end.
Yeah.
The bride is succumbs to the vampire, marries the vampire, and then gets bitten by the vampire. End of book. Modern day, though, often it is a romance. Twilight being, and they become integrated with you. It's interesting how we've sort of changed that. Does that reflect our culture, do you think, that we want that, I guess, that connection with our darker side, and that darker side to be cured?
I think that's a good point, yes. I think there were people in Broadmoor who were completely fascinated with violence and evil. It's look at how many murders there are. Look at how many murders there are in America. While we've been talking, I bet you there have been about 15 murders committed around the world.
And that's always been the case, hasn't it? I mean, all the way back from cave people through to Romans, into modern day.
Yeah.
We've got, I guess, procedures in place to try and inhibit that behaviour in humans. But
known as the Metropolitan Police.
Yes.
Now, how many vampires
Yes.
are officers in the Metropolitan Police?
Well, okay, interesting. You're going into sort of real vampires. Could there be vampires in the Metropolitan Police, or people who identify as vampires?
I think there could certainly be people who identify as vampires. We must hope they are restricted to the lower ranks of the police.
Maybe they will be at the very high ranks of the police. Maybe it's not just the middle management aren't. And that's a bit of your book which I found fascinating and new, totally new to me, that there are people in the world who identify as vampires, who do drink blood. And there are groups, and I know you interview people in the Atlanta Vampire Alliance.
Yeah, yes, I agree, yes.
And I think anyone listening, if they were like me when they first heard this, would just automatically assume crackpots. People who've watched too much Twilight, over-identified, and therefore they're just at the far end of the bell curve, oddballs. But when you wrote about them, actually, I think you were rather fair. And you quoted one, I wrote it down because I thought it was really interesting, that one of the members of the Atlanta Vampire Alliance said, "We do not identify with fictional characters, supernatural powers, or immortality, nor do we have any difficulty distinguishing between fantasy and reality." I think that's really interesting, because they have this sort of sense that, no, they're not fantasists, but yet they still want to drink blood.
Some of them become chefs.
Because of the handling of the meat and the raw. Yes. But when you spoke with them, what did you get from them? What did you feel, I suppose, when you were speaking to these people?
They just seemed ordinary but ghoulish,
Yes.
I mean...
And you say ordinary because, again, you write in the book that they had doctors, lawyers, scientists, teachers. A lot of them were parents.
Yes.
Not people you would easily cast in your mind as outliers. People who could be walking amongst us.
Yeah. People indeed.
Do you feel that need for blood in these people is a placebo? Is it something which... Because a lot of people say they have a physiological need for it, and there is theories, isn't there, about that. But do you think it's probably more psychological need?
I think I think for few people, it offers hope of a longer life and virility in men.
Was it mostly men when you spoke to them?
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And even the stories, though, going back to fiction,
Yeah.
vampires are mostly men.
Yes.
I know there are exceptions, but again, on the whole, why is that?
I think because if you look at the literature on violence in general, it is mostly men who are violent.
And I just thinking again, that sort of reflection of society, as you say, and so sexual violence is part of that. And most of sexual violence is initiated by men towards the weak female. And in the stories of vampires, you do get that predator vampire, that male predator, and that weak, almost virginous female who's prey.
Yes.
Is that, do you think, why the writers like Bram Stoker, like Polydori, wanted to reflect that? Or was it a subconscious thing that's just how it was for them?
I think it's different from Polydori and Stoker. I think it was a subconscious thing. Stoker knew what he was doing. You know, he'd been, as I remember, the manager of, was it the Haymarket Theatre? He knew what's put bums on seats.
Yes. Let's talk about incest. Again, you mention it again in your book in regarding to vampires. A lot of vampire stories have incest in them. From that, so I guess from a psychological point of view, why is that weaved into the story?
Well, incest is such a big taboo. Killing people is a taboo. Drinking blood is a taboo. Bring them all together. People are so different.
Yeah.
That is one of the things psychology does come to grips with a bit. But no one really, there's a famous saying of Gordon Allport, who was saying, I think it goes something like, in some ways, everyone is like everyone else. In some ways, they're like, some other people. And in some ways, like no one else.
Yeah. And so is it almost like the vampire story, a safe place for people to play out forbidden desires?
I think that's true, but I think some people can't stop at imagination or, I mean, I have no idea, because I don't study the murder statistics, how many murders involve vampiric traits, or whether the newspapers decide not to report them.
We talked about real vampires, at least people who identify as vampires. There are plenty of people who are in between the fans of vampires. Do you think there are psychological traits that make someone more drawn to the vampire story?
I think almost certainly there are. An attraction to violence, a desire to experience it vicariously. And of course, one subject we have not yet touched upon are the number of Church of England clergymen who are vampires.
We haven't. To be honest, looking through my question list, it wasn't one on there, but now you brought it up.
One needs to ask that, because, it may be that there's such a level of psychological disturbance in clergymen that it would be very strange if some weren't fascinated by vampires.
And I'm thinking, going back to, I guess, teenagers. I'm thinking stereotypically, the goth subculture, interested in that fascination with death, morbidity, and drawn to, Twilight when it was around, True Blood, and there are new vampire stories coming out here, there, and everywhere. Is it a dangerous thing, do you feel? Or is it actually a catharsis? Is it a cathartic appeal to do this?
It depends on the person. Look, there are people who are drawn to violence and will act it out.
Yes.
There are others who are drawn to reading about violence. I mean, I enjoy a good murder mystery, but I've not yet murdered anybody.
So you say.
So I say.
And then again, I guess it's that Freudian Jungian side. If you are somebody who believes in that side of it, you might feel it is a good catharsis. If you're not, then actually you might feel it's dangerous and a pathway towards more dangerous
things psychology does need to do, is to be better at analysing individual people. Because now, particularly since it is so university-driven, so many experiments are just on students, it's hard to do that. I mean, I would love, it won't happen, to see Trump, Netanyahu, the Ayatollah, subjected to serious psychological scrutiny.
And Trump is an interesting one. I know I haven't read it, but I know there is a book by I think it's his cousin, and she's a psychotherapist in the States, and she's written a book on Trump. I don't believe they get on overly well because it's not overly complimentary and flattering of Trump. But it's one on my reading list, and I'd love to get Trump on here, obviously, but I'd like to speak to somebody about Trump and what they feel about that. So maybe I'll try and speak with her.
Sounds like a good, interesting idea.
Fascinating. Let's just go back to vampires across time in popular culture, the fantasy, the fiction. I guess vampires have changed over time. Do you think that has reflected what's been going on in culture?
Well, I think it's almost bound to. The original Polydori's vampire was really for a very educated elite class. And now, there were even children's books. There's a book called Baby Vampire. Have you read that?
I haven't, no.
Yes.
What age group is that aimed at?
Three around.
Yeah, okay. And you pick out in the book Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles as almost a turning point, a little bit, of vampires being able to suddenly see their own reflection, what that means. Could you sort of elucidate me on that?
Vampires have become more psychologically sophisticated. So, I don't think Polydori's vampire had much sense of anything but blood. And now I think, they go for analysis, don't they now?
When did the vampire become sexy?
I suspect in 1920, and there were Hollywood movies about it. Well, they have to be to sell the books, sell the films.
So it's evolved where it is into this romantic side of things, potentially if you're going to read Jungian into it, because we are bringing our shadow self into ourselves. Can you have a guess at where it's going next? Where would you want to take vampires yourself next if the story was up to you?
We've had the violence. We've had the sort of... the vegetarian vampire.
There you go.
The green vampire.
The green vegan or vegetarian vampire. Yes, drinking beetroot juice.
Exactly.
as a substitute.
Exactly, yes.
Craving at midnight around the co-op. The Esso garage that stays open all night. Yeah, well, there you go. There you are. That's the next film.
There we are, the vegan vampire. Yeah.
There probably would be an audience for that, to be honest. Yeah, I think so. I was interested, again, I made a few notes of how things have changed, and also, I guess, how the stories have integrated other areas of human psychology, and interested in your view on them, I suppose. Anne Rice, the vampires, frequently engaged in same-sex relationships. It started even that homosexuality had become normalised. The 1995 film, I don't know if you've seen it, The Addiction, where it talks about vampirism is used as a metaphor for tackling addiction. Really, and used as a lesson.
I haven't seen the film,
no. No, fair enough. Let the Right One In.
So?
Let the Right One In. It's a Swedish film, and then the Americans remade it because Americans don't like watching Swedish films. It was an interesting one. It started about a story about a relationship between two young children, a boy and a girl. And the girl, this is a spoiler alert for anyone who's not seen it yet, and I'm sorry, David, but the girl turns out to be centuries-old vampire who's not parent, you assume it's the parent, but the keeper, will somebody go out and kills people to get blood for her. Anyway, these two young people start a relationship, not a sexual relationship, just a friendship, and it ends up talking about loneliness. It talks about the concept of the need for connection, isolation, and things like that. In your mind, you're a storyteller. Is that good storytelling to adapt the vampire story in that way, or is that again spoiling it?
No, I think it probably is quite good, and it will reach people other stories of that sort might not.
If you could recommend one thing, book, TV, movie, I guess that you think captures that sort of psychological entity of the vampire, where would you say direct people to go in?
I'd still direct them to Bram Stoker, actually.
Would you? Okay. The book?
The book, yes.
Yes.
Why? Count Dracula.
Why that one?
Well, I just think it's effective, it's well written.
Thank you very much for chatting.
Delightful.
It's been great. Is there, I guess, from all the things we've said, and I think the psychology of vampires would be quite surprising to a lot of
Yeah.
people, which is why I find it fascinating as a topic. From everything we said, is there one thing you'd like people to take away about the psychology of vampires?
Well, just vampires do reflect a certain dark side of our personality, and that's why we're interested in them.
Yes. Great. So vampires may be creatures of the night, but they can also shine a light on our deepest fears of death, of desire, and of control. And they may even be a healthy way for us to vicariously play out our darkest fantasies. David, thank you very much for digging over the psychological depths of the undead with me. I know you've got a book coming out on Richard Cromwell, Oliver Cromwell's son.
Yeah.
When can people expect that?
November.
November. So keep an eye out for that. And what's it called?
It's called Richard Cromwell at the moment.
Very easy to Google. So yeah, look out for that one. And where can people find out more about your books, your films?
Well, on Amazon, and if people want, I'll give you my email if you want. They can write to me. I don't mind responding to emails.
Yeah, okay.
It's dcpsychologynews@gmail.com.
Brilliant. I'll put it in the show notes of the thing, so put it there, and I'll put your website there as well, so people can find out more. Well, just going to say thank you very much for listening, everyone. If you've enjoyed getting your teeth into this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, share it with someone who you think could do with a little bite of psychological insight. You can also follow the show on Instagram and on TikTok, where I do share extra bits and I share shorts about psychology. You can look it up at Everything's Psych. Thank you very much. Thank you, David.
Thank you.